Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Caroli. I am a senior fellow on AI governance and regulation at the One AI Center. Moving on to the next section, I'm very excited to introduce our next speaker. We will now have the privilege to hear from Deputy Head of Mission for Canada, Ms. Sarah Cohen. As part of the Embassy's senior executive leadership team, Sarah oversees programs dealing with foreign and defense policy, energy and environment, public safety, border security, immigration, intelligence liaison, and law enforcement, so a very broad range of policies. Canada currently holds a unique position in the international AI landscape, a leader in AI development and innovation and talent. Canada is at the forefront of responsible AI governance and international cooperation, from the UN to the OECD to the IC network, etc. Canada will now take on the G7 presidency in 2025, and we are really excited to hear what to expect from it, from the newly established AI Safety Institute, and on the importance of international AI diplomacy. Please join me in welcoming Deputy Head of Mission, Sarah Cohen.
Laura, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. It's a real thrill to be with you here today on this slightly rainy, gray Monday morning, but to talk about such important issues. Particularly at this moment in time when our country is just a few short weeks away from assuming the presidency of the G7. So I'm going to make the obvious joke, which you may have heard already several times today, which is that, of course, AI had no role in drafting my remarks today, at least as far as I am aware. One thing for sure, there were definitely humans in the loop, a wide array of humans in my embassy and also in Canada working on these very important issues. I'll also now deliver the caveat, which is, I guess, a little bit bad news given the table that has been set by Laura and CSIS. I don't have any big scoops to share with you today about what AI-related initiatives Canada will champion during our G7 presidency. Firstly, out of respect for our Italian friends, of course, who are still at the helm. Also, a bit of a career-limiting move to scoop one's prime minister, who has the right of first announcement on these issues. So please do stay tuned for announcements from the appropriate source in terms of concrete, specific ways in which we will be using our presidency. That being said, what I can tell you, that one thing is definitely for certain. AI will indeed feature in our G7 agenda for 2025. At this year's summit in Apulia, Prime Minister Trudeau announced that Canada would seek to advance cooperation on rapidly evolving technologies like AI during our presidency. And as many of you know already, the G7 has played a significant role in shaping the global governance of AI, from the Canada-led 2018 Common Vision on AI that led to the creation of the Global Partnership on AI, GPI, to the more recent Hiroshima AI process launched in 2023. This latest effort is being advanced not in isolation, but in consultation with international organizations like OECD, GPI, and a diverse group of friends spanning Africa, Latin America, the Indo-Pacific, and other regions. To date, the global conversation on AI governance has been focused on addressing the risks and harms of the technology to people, institutions, and societies at large. This is critically important for all countries, although we have to recognize the leadership of the U.S. administration most recently. At their November 16th meeting in Lima, President Biden and President Xi agreed together that humans, and not AI, will continue to control nuclear weapons. While much remains to be done in the areas of safety and human decision-making, we see an opportunity to cooperate on seizing the potential of this technology to drive economic growth and sustainable development in our economies and around the world. Amid growing geopolitical competition, especially with the PRC, we must strike a balance between protecting our technological advances and enhancing the competitiveness of our AI sectors on the one hand, and addressing AI divides with the global majority on the other. This is crucial for protecting our economic and national security interests, and also for countering authoritarianism in the digital sphere. The May 2023 G7 Leaders Statement on Economic Resilience and Security notably identified unwanted leakage of critical technology as a core pillar of our collective work. The focus of this work, and now I'll quote directly from the statement, is on preventing the narrow set of technological advances that are assessed to be core to enhancing the military and intelligence capabilities of actors who may use these capabilities to undermine international peace and security from being fueled by our company's capital, expertise, and knowledge. As Laura mentioned, at the embassy, I do have a particular focus on national security and foreign policy. Cue lots of who's keeping us safe from the killer robots jokes. So you can imagine this line of effort is especially dear to my heart. And obviously, the stakes don't end there. AI divides are being heavily exploited by our adversaries. As emerging markets and developing countries increasingly call on states to address inequalities in access to AI, we must show that the G7 is a viable partner for the rest of the world on AI. There's much to build on here, from the US's Partnership for Global Inclusivity on AI to the Canada-UK AI for Development Initiative to Italy's Emerging AI Hub for Sustainable Development. We would all do well to learn as much as we can about these great initiatives. Shifting gears here a little to briefly talk about AI's voracious appetite for energy. From Canada's perspective, it is imperative that we ensure that the mainstreaming of AI in our governments and workforces does not undermine our progress towards shared climate goals. Investments in compute across the G7 present opportunities to cooperate on finding environmentally sustainable ways to build and use AI. At the same time, there is considerable hope that AI could itself be used to promote energy efficiency and combat climate change. Canada's domestic investments in AI, totaling $2.4 billion in this year's budget, will enable us to further research cooperation with G7 plus partners and enhance our position as a leader in AI research. Anchored by decades of innovation and expertise, Canada's AI ecosystem, bolstered by 3 national AI institutes in Montreal, Toronto, and Edmonton, continues to lead globally. We recently established the Canadian AI Safety Institute, CASI, to advance the science of AI safety and strengthen Canada's ability to assess and mitigate risks associated with advanced AI systems. Ultimately, this is intended to build trust in the technology and support adoption of AI technologies. CASI operates 2 research streams: investigator-led research, which will leverage Canada's research community, and government-directed projects with the National Research Council. This model integrates academic, governmental, and private sector expertise. From frontier AI risks highlighted in the Bletchley Declaration, such as on biological weapons and cybersecurity, to risks related to deep fakes and bias, CASI is intended to take a broad approach to assessing risk associated with advanced AI systems. And CASI, of course, is a founding member of the International Network of AI Safety Institutes, collaborating with counterparts in the US, UK, EU, Japan, Korea, and Australia. This network will allow international partners to work together to develop a common understanding of the capabilities and risks of advanced AI systems. And so as we build trust in AI in our societies, we must ensure that the transition to an AI-powered workforce is incremental and fair, providing workers with the training, resources, and career pathways needed to thrive in the new economy. We were pleased to see Italy prioritize this in their G7 presidency, and very proud to sign on to the G7 Action Plan for a human-centered adoption of safe, secure, and trustworthy AI in the world of work. And so Canada's AI agenda will build on Italy's work this year, and on the Hiroshima AI process during Japan's presidency in 2023. We hope to see the OECD, now integrated with GPI, continue efforts on the Industry Code of Conduct, which can foster rights-respecting practices across G7 plus AI sectors and strengthen accountability. And I would also like to stress that France's AI Action Summit in February will also be an important stop on the road to Canada's G7 Summit in Kananaskis. We are working with France to ensure Canada's G7 presidency amplifies and builds on the outcomes of the Action Summit. Before I close, I would be remiss in just not mentioning Canada-US collaboration in this space, because we are in Washington, D.C. this morning, and this is the core of my day job. So allow me to wrap my remarks by saying a few words about this collaboration. It's an enormous privilege to work on a bilateral relationship between 2 neighbors whose primary objective is to keep each other safer and more secure. This is not a luxury that all of my diplomatic friends and colleagues around the world have these days, and I think it is always important to pause, all of us who work on Canada-US relations, and remember what a fortunate spot we are in by virtue of geography, but also that partnership, that friendship, and that allyship. I really do believe that U.S. vital interests on AI and other tech files don't fluctuate as much as we're tempted to think. A central feature has been that no one country can go it alone, and that the impact is stronger when like-minded countries work jointly. And so just like we have worked very closely with the current administration on many aspects of AI governance and AI safety, my expectation is that this will continue to form a core part of the Canada-US partnership as we engage with the incoming administration with the same seriousness, commitment, and dedication. This is consistent with our approach over the last 8 years, and we're very confident that there will continue to be a strong community of interest guiding our bilateral work. So much is at stake over the near to medium-term horizon that it's incumbent on all of us to do our best to seize the moment. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the session. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today. Thank you.
Thank you again, Sarah, for very insightful remarks. Please be informed that our next panel will start momentarily.
Okay, sounds like the mics are on. Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Brielle Hill. I am the Associate Director for the CSIS Wadhwani AI Center. I'm really excited to be here on stage, gathered with the leading AI developers and deployers. You may notice that Kate Purchase is missing from the stage. Unfortunately, she had an emergency and was unable to make it today, but thankfully Ani is here to represent Microsoft with us. I'm not going to be able to do their bios as much justice as they will to be able to tell you what they do in their day job. So I'm going to kick it over to them to introduce themselves. Wendy, I will start with you. NTT may not be a buzzword across Washington, but it's certainly a global player. We're really thankful that you're here. If you could tell us a little bit about NTT's role in the AI value chain and then sort of what you do at NTT Data.
Sure. Well, first let me make sure everyone knows what NTT Data is and who we are. We are a $30 billion global business and technology services firm. I represent the AI office, and I'm the Chief AI Officer for our North America practice here in the United States and Canada. So nice to be here with you. You heard a little bit about NTT Data's participation, especially in the Hiroshima process. We are based in Japan, and so that was a very important part of our participation. And then I personally am a more than 25-year practitioner of AI and data science. That's what my background is in. And I have been both in private sector corporate. I've also been in public sector. I used to work for Department of Army for a bit for the United States, and now I'm in consulting. So nice to be here. So
you've had a quiet life up to this point, it sounds like.
That's right.
Ani, what does it look like to be in charge of responsible AI policy for Microsoft?
Thank you, Brielle. Well, I'll start by saying, being in charge of responsible AI policy does not fall on me alone. There's a big team at Microsoft that works on this, and that's very much by design. So since 2019, we've had our Office of Responsible AI, and our group is an interdisciplinary group. So I'm on the public policy team, but we also have our internal policy team. We have a sensitive uses and emerging technology team, a governance and enablement team, and of course the legal team as well. And we have all these functions because we found that it's really necessary to have this cross-cutting approach to effectively implement and operationalize Microsoft's 6 responsible AI principles into the work of building and developing products. So it's a collaborative effort and one that I'm really thrilled to be a part of.
Thank you. And look, you are responsible for AI policy development and analysis at Google, which I assume is more than one job at a time. So what does that look like for you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I do a lot of our work developing policy positions and doing engagements around sort of a set of issues related to the most advanced AI models. So a lot of our work around AI governance, AI testing, AI evaluation. I will say that like Microsoft, Google is a big company. AI is very central to our mission, and so in a way, everyone is working on AI. But we do a lot of work on our team, specifically on developing our positions and thinking about the future of AI and sort of the future of AI governance.
Thank you. So for today's discussion, I'll just give a little bit of a background. We'll kick off a conversation. We'll try to leave time for audience Q&A. So if you do have a question, please scan the QR code and submit it. I will try to fumble around with the iPad and ensure I get to as many as possible towards the end of the conversation. But I want to take us back. We just heard from Deputy Head of Mission Sarah Cohen that talked about Canada's G7 presidency and some of the work that's been done leading up to today, and including a look at what they might be thinking about for 2025. Earlier today, the Japanese ambassador to the U.S. talked about the Hiroshima AI process, the comprehensive policy framework, and the continued work of the Italian presidency, including their upcoming reporting framework. So even further, though, 6 to 7 years ago, AI ethics was all anybody could talk about. Each one of your companies, in fact, put out statements on AI ethics. And you guys are saying, customers are saying, governments are now saying that making statements is simply not enough, and we need to move from high-level principles into concrete implementations. So today we want to discuss some of the best practices, challenges, and next steps for implementing codes of conduct at the industry level. Ani, I'm going to start with you. When I think about governance, I think about how corporate leaders can know and show that they are committed to these principles that are laid out on everybody's websites and in press releases. So I want you to talk to me a little bit about how companies can know and show that they are truly embedding those practices into their day-to-day culture and work.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I think the best way that I can speak to this is by talking about Microsoft's approach, which is one approach. It's not the only approach, but thus far it's been working relatively well for us. So as you say, we started off thinking about responsible AI in terms of our 6 principles, which include very predictable things like fairness, transparency, accountability, privacy, and security. But then, of course, the real rubber hits the road when you think about how to put those principles into practice. And the way that we've done it, the way that we're showing that we're doing it, is by creating a responsible AI standard. And what that standard is it's a document, and it sets out goals and requirements attached to each of those high-level principles. And this is the standard that guides the work of our product teams. So when there's an AI system that's being integrated into a Microsoft product, the responsible AI standard applies. And product teams look to the standard and go through it bit by bit to make sure that they're accounting for all of the principles and the submeasures that we've developed to implement those principles into the product that's being developed. So, it's an ongoing process. This responsible AI standard is informed by what we have collectively developed internally as our best practices. And of course, it's also informed by regulations existing and forthcoming. So from our perspective, that's how we continue to refine our approach to knowing and showing our commitment to these responsible AI principles.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot there about sort of companies developing their own policies. Then you have domestic frameworks and regulations that are being developed. And at the same time, we have international work streams. So I want to try to connect that throughout this conversation a little bit. And look, I want to talk to you a little bit about how companies can then actively shape the development of common principles. So can you tell me a little bit about how we can make sure that these practices are inclusive, not solely dictated by large companies, but certainly large companies should play a role in that?
Yeah, I think if you take a look at what's happening in the governance space, a lot of what companies are doing, our company, many of the leading AI companies, we've committed to a number of things. So sort of various commitments, like the Seoul commitments, the Munich Accord, the Thorn commitments. And most of those commitments have come from sort of multi-stakeholder collaborations where many different stakeholders in the ecosystem came together and sort of discuss the vision for AI, I think it's important to keep in mind that when it comes to governance, we're still in the early stages. We're still learning a lot about the science of testing, evaluation, of governance. And so these sort of flexible frameworks that allow companies the ability to sort of figure out the right way to implement them that aligns with their principles, aligns with the goals of the broader AI ecosystem is important. One thing I think I will flag is sort of, we think it's important, and we're hoping that future initiatives are more inclusive of sort of a wider range of global voices. So I do think we have a concern that a lot of the fora that where AI governance discussions have been happening have sort of been over-indexed on sort of rich countries. So we've seen the OECD and the G7 take a lot of action in this space. And we're concerned that if we leave out many of the other countries in the world, not only will the framework be less resilient, but we'll overall have poor governance because we're not incorporating a wider range of perspectives.
Sure. I want to put a pin in the inclusivity because I think that can be something we bring into the conversation throughout today. But I think that actually tees up a question for Wendy, which is about your internal risk management framework, which is publicly available on NTT's website. And it has been developed to, quote, ensure leadership can exercise control over promotion of the appropriate usage of AI in responses to AI risk. So can you talk about how this is applied internally at NTT, this risk management framework?
For sure. So it's a global risk management framework, and I, as the Chief AI Officer for North America, am responsible for executing against it. But what I think is so interesting about NTT data is not only are we responsible for activating it within our own company, but I spend almost every day interacting with our customers and our clients and talking about their risk framework. So it's a really nice way to be able to stitch together what we believe and the principles and the actions that we want to take with what our clients and customers believe and want to take on their behalf as well. And what I didn't mention at the beginning when I said and introduced who NTT data is, we work with 3/4 of the global 100 companies, global Fortune 100 companies. But we also have a really extensive partner ecosystem that includes, of course, folks like Microsoft and Google, but also a lot of small startups as well. So not only do we have conversations with big companies and talk about the risk frameworks, but we also are partnering with startups to have those same conversations and how it may be a different application for them.
Yeah, so are you able to then take sort of what they're saying, take your existing framework, and are you saying you help them develop their own? Is this a product that you provide some of your customers?
It's definitely a service that has become very forefront in what we bring to our clients, absolutely. Almost all of our clients, in fact, I can't think of a single one that hasn't asked us to help them with their specific AI governance framework process, committee, all of the above. Yeah.
Okay. I want to take a step back and talk about the state of international AI governance today. There are many multilateral efforts. We heard about it all throughout this morning, and I'm sure we will try to touch on as many as possible in this conversation. But it's all about the development of responsible AI policy frameworks. And so, look, I pulled this quote from the CEO of Google and Alphabet, Sundar Pichai's piece in the Financial Times that was written in May 2023. And I want to read a part of this quote to you. He says, developing policy frameworks that anticipate potential harms and unlock benefits will require deep discussions between governments, industry experts, publishers, academia, and civil society. So legislators may not need to start from scratch. Existing regulations provide useful frameworks to manage the potential risks of new technologies. He goes on then to talk a little bit more about investing in research and development. But I want to give you a chance to sort of react to this quote and maybe share some thoughts about the incentive for companies to adopt and adhere to voluntary practices and sort of connect to what you said earlier about playing a leading role in helping to develop these regulations.
Yeah, I mean, so I think what our CEO said still stands. AI, in some ways, is a new technology, but we have lots of existing frameworks that apply to AI. just like they would apply to any other technology. And so we do think it's important as we think about sort of what the future of governance looks like. We realize we're not starting from scratch, and that there are existing rules and regulations and laws that apply, especially in many sectors where they're very specific, sort of sector-specific laws and regulations. I think the other thing that's important is, like I said, the industry has committed to a number of things. There are various reasons we make those commitments, but one is that, developing responsible AI is really important as a value to our company. And so we're glad to make those commitments when we think that it aligns with our values and our principles. It's also important for the broader AI industry because people will not use AI if they don't trust AI, and they won't trust AI if they don't have some sort of signs that AI is being developed responsibly. And so that is important as well. When we think about where to go in the future, these commitments, I think, are a good anchor point. I think they were developed collaboratively with between many of the stakeholders you just mentioned in that quote. Governments are involved, companies are involved, civil society is involved. We're all as an industry trying to figure out how to implement these. We're doing a bit of trial and error, and I think what's really important right now at this moment is really focusing on implementing these, refining these commitments, figuring out how to do them in a way that's scalable and sustainable, and then we can use that information to really inform future discussions.
Sure, and when you mentioned scalable, to me, then we need to go further and say, well, then how do you take these voluntary frameworks and make sure that they are able to be implemented? And so, Ani, I don't know if you wanted to share some reflections on sort of that, taking it to the next step, putting some meat on the bones of these voluntary commitments.
Yeah, well, I think as Alok was saying, it's definitely going to be an iterative process. I mean, I think when we are talking about these commitments at a high level in the abstract, it's somewhat easier to sort of reach consensus on what we think ought to be done. And then when it comes time to rolling up your sleeves and figuring out what these look like in terms of engineering requirements, in terms of product design requirements, that's when you start to see maybe some of the wrinkles emerge or questions emerge. And I think where we are now is trying to get an understanding of exactly what those questions are and where there are overlapping issues, where there are ambiguities, where we simply don't really have many answers yet. And I think that, again, we do need to work together as an industry, but also across civil society and government to start developing answers to these questions. I think we'll get to this, but one key tool for reaching perhaps some solutions for this could be the nascent network of AI safety institutes. We think there is tremendous potential through those networks to identify, or begin to develop answers to some of these key questions, like what are the risks that we should be prioritizing? How do we develop evaluation and testing measures for those risks? And then how do we develop, methods to actually mitigate those risks?
Sure.
Can I just add on to that? I think that the task of identifying ways to responsibly implement AI, this technology is moving so quickly. It's not going to end once we, decide today, I'm making it up, right? Let's say we decide today what the right framework, what the right governance, what the right policy is. It's going to have to be flexible and evolve because this will continue to change and it will be something that we won't have answers to all along the way, and we'll have to keep working towards it.
If we solve it today, this will be the greatest conference of all time. But in lieu of probably reaching that goal, I'm wondering if actually then you can share what are some of the biggest challenges you're hearing from all of the different stakeholders that you work so closely with?
Yeah, well, let's start with large private enterprise. I think that the big question that I'm hearing from private enterprise is, number one, I already have a data governance policy process and follow data governance regulations. How do I think about incorporating AI into what I already do and the frameworks that I already have? So that's item number one. I think the other question that a lot of large enterprises are grappling with right now is, I don't want to go it alone. How do I engage with sister companies, with partners like Microsoft, like Google, and even with other organizations, both within industry and across industry, in order to better understand the landscape? That's a challenge. And keeping up with the changes in technology, changes in policy, changes in regulation, I think there's a genuine perplexity. Is that a fair perplexion? I don't know what the right noun form of being perplexed is. But I think there's a general concern of this is moving so fast. How do I keep up with it?
Yeah, and something we talked about in preparation for this conversation was actually the idea of fragmented regulations. And look, I think you're kind of giving me some eyes over here that maybe you want to jump on this topic. So I'm going to knock it over to you.
I mean, this is something we think about a lot. Is what we're hoping is that we can develop a global framework that is applicable broadly across much of the world, because the alternative is the possibility of a world where we have lots of different country-level frameworks that involve individual engagement, individual types of testing, individual types of regulations, some of which may not be fully compatible with each other. That is something that is concerning for us as Google, as a large company. I think it would be unworkable for smaller companies. And so we're really anchoring on things like standards organizations and other sort of broadly agreed upon international frameworks as a way to sort of bring alignment to this space and prevent this scenario of having to comply with multiple dozens of different types of regulations across the world.
So, please.
Well, I was just going to say, even within the United States, there are different potential for fractured regulations across states and cities. So take, for example, New York City's recent implementation of a policy around hiring and employment, use of AI in hiring and employment. So they set out a very specific definition of what AI means and in what context the regulation applies. But what if another large city in the United States or elsewhere in another country decides to pick a different definition? How will companies be able to operate and exist and comply, which they want to do, but comply in such a fragmented space?
Yeah, so you're saying that, your point has been that these international frameworks or conversations have been an anchoring point so that we can all speak the same language when we're talking about it, but that may not necessarily be the case even domestically here in the United States. Ani, I'm wondering if you have an idea of what you would ask either local, national, or international governance processes to think about when it comes to fragmented regulations.
Yeah, so I think I would underscore the points that Alok and Wendy have been making. I mean, I think you'll find across industry there's pretty clear consensus that fragmentation is a bad outcome because it leads to the results that we've been talking about. One, of course, it's going to be harder for small and medium-sized enterprises and for AI startups to be able to participate when the regulatory landscape is fractured, because it basically serves as a barrier to entry. And that's actually a very real concern. We're hearing it even from Microsoft entities like GitHub, who are like very homed in on concerns around these sorts of players. And two, when you have this sort of fragmentation and a lack of clear focus across the regulatory landscape, that creates more opportunities for things to slip between the cracks or for, abusive conduct to not be caught in the way that we want it to be caught. And so when we're thinking about what we seek to achieve and what we're asking regulators up and down the chain to do, it's to focus on globally significant governance outcomes. We're asking them to focus on interoperability, and we're asking them to build off of the work that's been done. So Alok was saying, we're not starting from scratch here. We think the work that the G7 has done, that the OECD is advancing, and that the Canadian presidency has further opportunities to advance, can serve as these anchor points so that we're not reinventing the wheel, but that when regulators think that there's a need that hasn't yet been captured, then they can focus on just that delta. They can zoom in on what that exact need is and fill it there, rather than creating these systems of overlap that even for companies like Microsoft, believe it or not, really detract from our ability to focus on like the actual goals of regulation, which is creating safe and trustworthy systems. The bottom line is that when you have fragmentation, you're pulling resources away from focusing on things that matter, because it becomes almost a question of form over function. And that's what we want to avoid. At bottom, creating strong regulation, thoughtful and sensible regulation is important because it builds trust. We can't do anything if there's no trust in the technology that we're developing. I mean, that's table stakes. And so the question is like, what meaningfully advances that trust? And that's what we think about when we engage.
It seems to me you're talking about making sure that we're filling any gaps from pre-existing work and keeping an eye on that, so we're not duplicating efforts. I'm not hearing that you think that it's duplicative so far, and I want to bring in the AI Safety Institute and the broader network into this conversation, because it seems to me that that's a good opportunity for corporations to give regulators, or have a throughway so that regulators can receive scientific information that will help inform regulations, and just keep that channel open and then share it broadly within the network. Alok, do you want to talk about how you guys are thinking about the AI Safety Institute?
Yeah, so right now we think one of the biggest issues we're facing as an AI industry is that the state of evaluation science is very early. So what we really need, there are lots of demand signals that we need better ways to test and evaluate model capabilities, the risks they might pose, and any other safety issues. And right now, the tests we have are quite early. And so when we think about the network of safety institutes, we think one of the most important roles they can play is to help advance the science, both through direct research efforts, as well as coordinating and interfacing with civil society, which is also doing some of this work, potentially research funding or research collaborations. But we think that, so every vision we have of how governance would work is reliant on being able to understand model capabilities in a much more precise way. And that, I think, is what we're hoping that the safety institutes can really focus on, because that will underpin, I think, almost every future initiative I can think of.
Sure. Ani, is this going to be added under your cap as well to work on this?
Yeah, so it's a real priority for Microsoft for precisely those reasons. There's a real opportunity here to use the AI Safety Institutes as centers for technical expertise. We have a lot of policymakers thinking about these questions already, but the answers oftentimes lie in the science, in the technology. And so if we can really use the ACs, I think, as they were conceived to be used, which is to be centers to build scientific consensus, then we have a real opportunity to advance the state of the science and simultaneously and consequently advance sensible policymaking that's grounded on the science. And as Wendy was saying too, as these technologies evolve, best practices scientifically and technologically are also going to evolve, and we think that the work of the ACs can really sort of steer us in a direction where we're sort of pinning to the right state of the science.
And when we talk about inclusivity, we were talking about some of the smaller companies who may not be represented on stage today. Is the AC network something that you're hearing about when you're in the room with some of these diverse clients that NTT Data has?
I think there's general comfort in knowing that the science and the technology is being used to inform what the policy and what the regulation will look like. That's really, I think, important, because there can be a general misunderstanding of what is AI. When we are up here using the letters AI, we probably mean more specifically generative AI, which is the latest exciting development. But there have been AI tools and different types of models that have been in place in both small and large enterprise in the private sector for decades. So making sure that whether it's the AC or whomever it is, any of the policy and regulatory contemplates the science and what the science can and can't do is what I think gives, I'll call it comfort, but at least some level of peace in moving forward with regulation.
Sure. I want to do sort of a short response back and forth with you guys for a second, because before we get to audience questions, which if you are online, there should be a link that you are able to submit a question if you have one. Those in the room, please scan the QR code. But we've talked about these different work streams that are going on, and we just had a good conversation about what role companies can play with the ACs. I'm wondering, as this is the Outlook for 2025 conference, what your New Year's resolution might be for AI policy in 2025. So if you can pick one thing that you really want to see moving the ball forward on an AI policy, I would love to hear that. So Alok, I think I'll start with you.
I mean, I've already mentioned we're hoping to see good progress on improving the state of AI evaluations. I think the other thing I can mention is that every time we have one of these AI summits, there's a lot of interest in creating new commitments and sort of thinking, what can we do that's new and shiny? And actually, I think we've built enough of a framework now that what's really important is looking back at the various things that companies have already did and figuring out how can we do those better. I know it's not as exciting to work on implementation as it is to work on something new, but I think that's what's really important, is figuring out how can we operationalize these better. And so we're glad to see the work the OECD is doing on making progress in that area on the G7 code of conduct. But we do hope that there's more focus on implementation and less on let's create more scaffolding, more things for companies to worry about instead of doing the things they're doing better.
Sure. Do you, sorry, I'll go to you guys next, but it brings up a question of, is there a large gap between the work that is being done in these different work streams and what you have already decided as companies matter a lot to you?
And there's a little bit of both. Like, certainly because of our principles and values, there are many things that governments think about that we're already doing internally, but that's not true 100%. And it's a dialogue. It's a dialogue in terms of what governments want that may not align with how we're thinking about things. It's a dialogue in which we'll provide technical information that will help inform their initiatives, but certainly commitments have required us to change things internally and to be much more precise in the way we're thinking about product development, product release, internal testing. So that pushes us to change internal practices as well.
Sure, makes sense. All right, Ani, back to my original question, your one goal for 2025.
I think it would be to sort of solidify and build consensus around the work that the OECD and the G7 have been doing. So we think that this reporting framework really has potential to be like an excellent anchor and international reference point. And so to like continue that work under the Canadian presidency would be terrific, so that, you know, industry has like a singular starting point for voluntary commitments. We think could, you know, really push the ball forward in a meaningful way.
Okay, and Wendy, same question.
Sure. Well, I think 2024 for us and for our clients has largely been about establishing the desire and the need for AI governance, and implementing it is what we're going to be doing in 2025 with our clients. So my one goal for 2025 is to see robust implementation of some of these best practices across the entire suite of industry.
And this actually leads to a question that was submitted from the audience that talks about gaps between standards and then operationalizing the framework. So what exists now maybe in the standards that we can either build upon, which is sort of what I've been hearing all of you say, we don't want to restart and completely build a new plane, but there are some frameworks in place that maybe we can jump from. So what are the gaps in the standards that match up to the frameworks? All right, Ani.
When we're talking about standards, I guess I don't know if we're talking about small s standards or capital S standards, but so I think that to the extent we're talking about, you know, like formal standards created by standard settings bodies, there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, I think some of the groundwork is starting to be laid for that. For instance, in the space of like content provenance and labeling, for example, we have some, you know, industry efforts that we're seeing sort of meaningful adoption of, something like the C2PA specification, and that can be pushed through the ISO, and we can then sort of have a formal standard on the other side of that. So that's a space where there's already, I think, a meaningful amount of work that has been done on the technical side that can then be formalized through formal standards. But in other spaces, we really don't necessarily even have that sort of starting point. So I'm thinking, for example, of something like measuring energy consumption, which is something that's required by the EU AI Act. And there's a lot of thought now being given to how do you measure this? What does this look like? And then not only how do you measure consumption, but how do you measure efficiency? That's something that the EU is going to be thinking about and considering through its standard setting bodies. And there's a lot more work, I think, that needs to be done. So in terms of gaps, it kind of depends on the specific subject. Obviously, we've spoken to the significant amount of work that remains to be done in testing and evaluation practices. So I think there's variability across the issues that are governed by AI governance frameworks and regulation. But I think bit by bit we can get there.
Sure. This individual wants us to go back to the AI Safety Institute. So I think, Alec, I will start with you. How are your companies planning to engage with the AI Safety Institute specifically? So are you looking to submit your frontier AI models for voluntary pre-release testing? Is there another first step that you want to take in order to make sure the work is being done and being done well, and that your company is being represented in that effort? But sort of concretely, what's something that you guys might be looking to do?
Yeah, so of the safety institutes, the UK one, I think, is the most mature, and we've been working with them since nearly the start of that institute. So we have partnered with them on things like testing. We anticipate that to continue. I think when we think about the role of safety institutes, we are hoping for them to mostly be sort of a research network or collaborating on advancing the state of the science with some role for testing. We're really thinking about sort of this idea of testing in only a few places where companies are based to sort of minimize burden, and thinking about how we can then share that information with other partners in the network. But that's, we've been working with the UK, that's where Google DeepMind has been based. We've had lots of conversations with the US Safety Institute for similar reasons. And I think we're thinking of those as like our two major partners, and thinking about how we can then make sure that other safety institutes have the information they need to be able to do their work, both in liaising with their home governments and sort of working to advance the overall state of AI science.
Sure, and that localization, I'm sure, gives you a better starting point for that back and forth, rather than an expectation to maybe share even broader than what might be helpful in the moment. This last question, I believe, before we have to wrap up here, is asking about sort of the next administration and how voluntary commitments may continue to develop AI diplomacy, those sort of notions. So I'm wondering, Wendy, if you have any thoughts about, since you work in so many different countries around the world, certainly this probably isn't your first transition for any official in office, but I'm wondering if there's something that you're looking specifically at the next administration.
Well, I don't know that I would say there's anything specific. What I would say is that we are open and engaged in where this next administration wants to focus, and how we can better support our clients and also our country, obviously. And we also do work with U.S. government as well. So how can we support all of the entities as the priorities may or may not change over time?
All right. Well, if there's a burning question that you guys did not get a chance to speak on, I would be happy to invite you to share any last thoughts before we sort of wrap up here. No? Okay. Well, no need to belabor the point. I believe I'm just going to sort of tell you what to expect for the rest of the day. But first, I wanted to implore you to take a look at the individuals or the companies represented on stage. Sort of what are they talking about? Advancing the G7, the work of the OECD, looking at how they're sharing this process from their internal perspective, and then how they hope to work with other corporations. I know I learned a lot about fragmented regulations, and it seems to me like the sooner we start talking about that, not that this is a new concept by any means, but the sooner that becomes even more of a priority within these conversations, the better and more robust our regulations can be moving forward. The Wadhwani AI Center is going to continue to put out our own analysis on this. Please do take a look at what we're up to. Stick around. We have lunch directly following this out in the reception area. After lunch, we will kick it off on a conversation about the energy demand for AI, and then we'll sort of end the day with the ambassador of France to the United States, who's going to talk about the upcoming AI Action Summit. So plenty to keep following along. Please do stick around throughout the day, and we thank you all for being here. Thank you guys for joining me here today.